walking the serpentine path, following the footsteps of the ancestors, walking the serpentine path, making our way back home. Hey ya, hey, hey ya, ho, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, ho. Hey ya, hey, hey ya, ho. Following the serpentine path. Life.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Serpentine Path podcast. My name is Claire Guardianship, and I'm a plant walker, song keeper, word weaver, artesana, visual and performance artist, womb wisdom keeper, and your guide on this serpentine path of life. Together, we'll dive deep into all things related to plant medicine, ancestral reconnection, intergenerational healing, womb sovereignty and bodily autonomy, rites of passage and initiation, time travel, shape-shifting, dimension hopping, the reclamation of our collective earth-based practices, and the ongoing, never-ending cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Welcome to the serpentine path where the ancestors have called us back to. Let's start at the end and find our way back home together.
Hello, everyone. Before we get into today's episode with my wonderful guest, Briana Georjae, I wanted to loop in a quick introduction. So, in this episode, we talk a lot about lineage and all of the different lineages that Briana walks, that I walk. And I wanted to take a moment to share a little bit about our shared lineage and teachings that we have both been learning under. So Briana and I met at this wonderful bodywork training that we did in Oregon on the land of one of our teachers, Kiddist Ashe and Maura Flynn of the Holy Well. And we were also learning with Naima Pierce and Prairie Wolf. And that was an amazing bodywork training that I'm going to share more about in future episodes. That was all about breast, belly, and pelvic care. So that is where we met. We've both been learning in the Holy Well with Kiddist and with Maura for different amounts of times, but that's like what brought us together. And then we also have other shared teachers that we've learned under at different times and in different capacities. So we both have also learned under Rochelle Saliga of Innate Traditions. I had Rochelle on the show a couple months back. That was a wonderful episode. And then we also have both learned under Maria Maldonado of Seed to Body Care, who I've also had on the show. And then the other thing I wanted to share before getting into this episode is that Briana and I talk a lot about integration and what the integration process is, particularly within the context of working with plant medicines, because she has her own deep path with plant medicines, with the medicine of ayahuasca, as do I, as my listeners know, and the work of what it means to integrate all of the information that you receive in ceremony and all of the healing when you leave ceremony. That's actually really the work. And so I wanted to pass on a really supportive insight that I received from Maria Maldonado that was offered to her by her elder, Melchor Ramos Seripigari of the Matsigenka community. And what this elder said to her is that the jungle is the university, and that when you leave, that's like when the real work begins of planting all of those seeds of all of the wisdom and teaching and information and orientation that you got from the territory, from the plants, from the elders, from the ancestors. And that's been a remarkably supportive insight for me over the past 10 months, being out of the jungle after living there full time for a year and a half and being very deep in my ceremonial work in that context, accompanying my elders through their dying portals, and then leaving and being like, okay, well, what do I do with all of this? Like this whole lifetime that I just lived, what do I do? And that context of like, that was the university, and now I bring forth all of that juiciness, all of that vitality, all of that information out into the world and find my own ways to weave it into the work that I'm doing, into the relationships that I'm building and maintaining and co creating, into all of the visions that I'm birthing. All of that has to actually happen outside of the jungle. So I wanted to include that before getting into this awesome interview. So without further ado, please welcome Briana Georjae. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Serpentine Path podcast. My name is Claire Guardianship. I'm your host, and I'm very excited to welcome a beautiful guest onto the show, a dear sister, Briana Georjae. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Nice to be in your company.
Awesome. Well, I will start with the question that I ask all of my guests, which is if your ancestors were here with us now, which of course they always are, how would they introduce you and what role would they say that you play in your family lineage?
Wow, that's such a big question. Um, I would say that I'm here for reclamation and remembrance. I'm here to preserve the traditions and medicines of the past, the stories of the past, the cosmologies and the healing rites of the past that are also so critical for the present times as well as the future times. I've always loved heirlooms. I've always loved traditions. I've always loved rituals. And I've always been so concerned with and so deeply curious about like where things come from and how they started and if they're no longer, like why are they no longer? That's been my interest since I was a child. And it's really, as I've matured, it's become like, okay, I'm here to preserve the things that need to be preserved, the things that will continue to support us in our evolutions as humans on this earth, continue to help us to be, good stewards moving forward. So, yeah, I guess that's what they would say.
So beautiful. And, it's funny because I like to always give contexts for my listeners to know how I bring on guests. And, you and I met recently in this really incredible bodywork training that we did with one of our shared teachers, Kitastashe, who was also on the show a few months back, and then our other teachers, Naima Pierce and Prairie Wolf. And we shared a tent when we were in Oregon together. We shared a little yurt with two other dear sisters. And we had one day in the training where we were doing trades, and we were working specifically on belly work, belly massage, abdominal massage. And when you were working on me, I had this really beautiful and intense vision that started like from my own felt sense of your hands on my body. And I felt so many grandmothers working through you. It was crazy. It was so beautiful. And it was very different to the way in which I felt other ancestors show up in the past. Like often when ancestors show up, there's like this deep well inside of me that almost like brings tears because I feel just so overwhelmed by their presence. Whereas when the grandmothers came through you, it was like such a quiet that came through, like such a grounded, calm stillness that was working through your hands, and the way in which you were able to move through the body and sense things in like the most grounded and like least rushed, like no urgency, just like total attunement. I was like, whoa, she is carrying some deep medicine in these bones. Like, what an honor it is to receive her touch. And then after that trade, I think is when we started really connecting more and talking and sharing and just learning about so many similarities that we have on our path. And of course, so many differences, obviously, because everyone's path is very unique. But the more that we shared, I was like, oh my God, me too. Oh my God, me too. Oh my gosh, okay, that's so cool. And learning about how you have been weaving so much on your path that is similar to the way that I've been weaving. And yeah, every conversation we had, I was just like, oh my gosh, I want to share more. I want to hear more. I want to know more about her story. And yeah, you do carry this like ancientness to you. Like I look at you and I'm like, she's 4,000 years old, like straight up. I don't know what cave she like birthed herself from, but this woman is like primordial, you know? So I do feel that you carry that very intense energy of the past with you, and then also this beautiful time traveler energy of being able to have like long-term vision of how we plant these seeds into the future, which is very much, also my own path, my own deep reconnection of what I've been doing for my whole life, but especially over the past 4.5 years, or honestly, I would say even longer, the past like 9 years. Um, Before I even started my path, my deep path with plant medicines, but it has deepened even more in my work with the medicine of Yahe, the medicine of ayahuasca. And so, yeah, connecting with you was just like such a blessing and such a gift. And so I would love to give you some space now to speak on, your path and your work and your orientation in the world, all that you're doing.
Damn, Claire. That's such a sweet introduction, and it feels really good, really affirming, really confirming to receive your reflection of me. Um, ever since I was little, and I said this in our training, but ever since I was little, I've always loved old people. Like I've always loved grandmothers and grandfathers. I grew up going to church and I always loved being around the elders and just like being in their presence, just like sitting next to them and hearing how they talk and just like listening and trying to get as much as I could. And obviously, getting as much as I could, it wasn't conscious, but I just like wanted to be close to them. My grandparents, all of my grandparents passed away, some of them before I was born, some of them like shortly after I was born. So I don't have a lot of memories of them. And I remember, but I do remember being like 5 years old, 6 years old. My mom will talk about this, like me being like, where are my grandparents? Like, where are they? And I would ask her this question frequently, and she would be like, they've passed, they transitioned. Um, and I was like, well, how could I get them back? Like, where can I find them? Because I would also go to friends' houses or go to birthday parties, and people's grandparents would be there. And I was so confused with where my grandparents were and couldn't integrate the fact that they had transitioned and they had passed, but I couldn't be near them, or I couldn't have their presence. So, like I was saying before about how they would describe me, I've always had this like yearning to be in the presence and to learn from elders and grandparents. And so, with my grandparents having passed, I've always sought out elders to learn from. And in addition to seeking out elders, I've always sought out and felt like this sense in my body of what is truth, what is memory, what is story, what is medicine from the past that um, needs to be remembered, needs to be preserved, and also needs to continue to be practiced. So that really is um, that I would say that's like that is like my intention, that is like my biggest purpose on this earth is listening for truth, medicine, stories of the past, and then being able to like carry them forward and for future generations to benefit from, as well as myself and my own lineage. And that purpose has, gosh, like taken me so many different places. I would say first, there was a lot of um, decolonization for me when it came to like how I learn and how I heal my body. First, how I heal my body. In my high school, like not even early 20s, but high school, I got like deep into addiction. And at some point, I wanted to find resolve with that. I did not want to be addicted anymore. And that was like my own volition. I was probably like 19 or 20. And I remember going to this outpatient clinic and them telling me, well, like you will just take this medication. And I was like, okay. And so I took it for a little bit and I was like, I still don't feel really clear. That's also around the same time that I had started experimenting more with psychedelics. So I didn't, and I was at the time I was addicted to opiates. So like I felt the difference. And I was like, oh, I don't want to be doped up. And the medication made me feel doped up. Anyways, I went back to the clinic and I was like, I don't want to take this anymore, but I want to be sober. And they were like, well, we have nothing for you. And I'm like, false. Not to them, but in my being, I remembered a way that I could be sober without their medications. And I didn't believe them. And I sought out healing by myself and started working with plants. I started practicing yoga and like getting more into my body and just trying to like learn about myself and understand how my body worked, understand how my consciousness worked. And, that started at 19 and, what is it like how old am I? 14 years later, I'm still doing that work. I'm still in this work of like I would call it like body literacy and learning, trying to understand more of who I am and how to heal myself, along with that purpose of preserving lineage, preserving story, preserving medicine. Um, and yeah, obviously, eventually I healed myself. I think it took me like a year and a half to 2 years to get sober. And that was like just by myself. And I've just been doing that ever since. Every time something comes up that I need support with, I find elders, I find community that can do that in the most like intact way. Yeah, I think having that clinic say no to me was my sparked this like disinterest in the medical system. I don't know. I almost like want to like go back a little bit. There's in addition to this like preserving ancestry, to preserving lineage, I've always been challenged by um, authority and Western systems like school, the medical system, the doctor, all of that. I've always been challenged by it, not felt aligned with it from like really, really young. Like going to get shots, going to the doctor as a child was a struggle. So I've always just been less interested in that and more interested in like, well, what would a grandmother do? Like, what would they do 200 years ago to like resolve this issue that I'm having?
I can't count the number of women who have told me that they want to transition off of birth control, but they don't know where to start. They're scared, they're vulnerable, and they don't know where to get accurate evidence based information. I feel these women's pain because I too was once in their shoes. I transitioned off of hormonal birth control at age 20 after being on the pill for 4.5 years. I didn't do any preparation, I didn't do any research, I just quit the pills cold turkey and got a copper IUD inserted a few months later. What happened over the next 6 years of my life was a complete and total shit show. I struggled with acne that was so bad that I ended up on spironolactone, doxycycline, Accutane, and every single topical that you could think of. My weight went through super intense fluctuations that made zero sense. My cramps were so painful that I couldn't get out of bed for the first few days of my cycle. I was bleeding through my clothes. My emotions were all over the place. I had constant headaches, a totally erratic sleep schedule, chronic vaginal infections, and lots of embarrassing bloating. Worst of all, I was entirely disconnected from the seat of my creative power, my womb. Now, the thing is, all of this pain, confusion, and disembodiment could have been easily avoided had I known then what I know now about female hormonal health and sacred womb reverence. Now, after years of healing my own relationship with my cycle, my fertility, and my sovereign right to prevent pregnancy without the use of hormonal contraceptives and IUDs, I have a lot of hard-earned wisdom to share with you all. The truth is that I didn't have a doctor to educate me on the medical side of this massive transition, and I didn't have a wise woman to midwife me through the spiritual side of this massive transition. But I figured out how to reclaim this biological and spiritual education for myself, and now I can offer it to other sisters who are seeking guidance and support. This journey of deep self-healing and womb liberation is what inspired my upcoming online group class, the Natural Birth Control Series. Together, we will dive into the physiologic brilliance of female fertility by interweaving the clinical facts and the mystical wisdom that all of our great-great-great-grandmothers once walked with. We will be reclaiming our womb sovereignty together in ceremony, in community, in the way that women have been doing since the beginning of time. Classes will be held on Zoom from 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the first 3 Sundays of October, with class recordings available for anyone who is unable to attend live. Our first class on October 5th will be focused on how to transition off of hormonal birth control and IUDs. Our second class on October 12th will be focused on intuiting our body's biological fertility signals. And our third class on October 19th will be focused on plants for pregnancy prevention and conscious contraception. The Natural Birth Control Series is open to women of all ages and life phases, including women in their fertile childbearing years, along with mothers, grandmothers, and aunties who want to help educate and support the young women in their lives. The Natural Birth Control Series is being offered for $33, which gives you access to all 3 classes and recordings, along with my extensive resource guide to support you on your womb sovereignty journey. To learn more about the program, you can visit the link in the show notes. Looking forward to seeing you in class.
Yeah, I can really understand, so many parts of what you just spoke to in terms of, my own experience with substance abuse. I wouldn't say that I was ever necessarily like heavily addicted to something like opiates or even to like cocaine or even to alcohol, but the way in which I was engaging with many substances for the first part of my life, probably up until like 23, 24. Um, and also kind of like addictive tendencies around sexuality and like relationships in general, very codependent dynamics, all of that what really came in to teach me how to save myself was my path with the plants. Plants in like every sense of the word, not just my path with like ayahuasca, although that has been like probably my biggest plant teacher, but also the plants that came in when I was like seriously suffering with very painful periods and like heavy bleeding and so many hormonal health issues. Like the plants came to me through originally this really amazing Irish elder when I was living in Ireland and like wolfing on a farm. And it was just this very like humble, down to earth, probably 60-year-old mother, who had been a caretaker for the elderly for pretty much her entire life. And then when her father died, he had been a gardener, and she shifted deep into her herbalism studies as a way to stay connected to him. And she was just this incredible little Irish witch, a little green witch. And the way that she passed the teachings of the plants on to me was that one day I woke up with really painful cramps and was like, I'm so sorry, I can't work today. I'm in so much pain. And she was like, okay, well, there's literally like nettle, red raspberry leaf, lady's mantle, a couple of other plants that I'm forgetting right now. Just like go make yourself a tea. Like, just do that. And I was like, what do you mean? And she showed me how to prepare a tea. Within 20 minutes, I was like, oh my God, this is magic, and so my own experience of that, of like going to the medical system, the Western medical system, throughout my entire life. I was like a very sickly child. I was in and out of the hospital. I almost died when I was 13. I dealt with like so many health issues. And I also come from a lineage on both sides of my family tree of Western medical doctors, nurses, dentists over the past few generations. Before that, they were all traditional folk healers. The thread of healing like continued forth and just kind of repackaged itself into what is considered like true medicine from like the Western perspective. But I had so many experiences where going to Western medicine made me sicker because I took more antibiotics, I took more antifungals, I did more treatments that like helped put a band-aid on the symptoms for a while, but then after the fact, like caused so many more issues that I just kept having to heal. And so I kind of went the same direction as you, just being like, everyone is telling me what I should do with my body, and my body is saying no. And I don't know where to go from here, but I know that right now I don't feel like the doctors are the ones that I need to be placing all of my trust in. Like, I really need to place all of my trust in my body's own capacity to heal itself. And I kind of just have to like raw dog it, just like go for it. And same thing of like just deep prayer and saying, okay, bring me to the people who can support me on my path. Bring me to the elders, bring me to the modalities that are going to be the most healing in this moment in time for me. Bring me to the teachings and the wisdom that is encoded into my cells somewhere in my lineage, somewhere in my DNA. It's been passed on to me and it's just been forgotten for a few generations, but I know it's there. And so, like, just prayers to my ancestors, to my angels, to guardians, to anyone on my spiritual team, to God, to Creator, of just like, please help me come into alignment with my own sovereignty in my own body. And then that, of course, like brought me down so many directions. A big aspect of that being all of the work that I do in terms of like womb wisdom keeping, birth work, midwifery, the path that I'm really deepening into now. But it's been such a theme, which I know is a big part of your path as well. And we'll talk to it. But yeah, something that was coming up when you were speaking was just kind of like the resistance to the Western um, model of authority, which is actually just like domination, right? It's like domination over someone else's body, domination over someone else's right to choice, domination over someone else's sense of truth in their own spirit. And it's something that I literally experienced like 2 days ago when I went to the dentist for the first time in like a couple of years because I hate going to the dentist and I refused to get an x-ray. because I don't want to expose my body to radiation. And they really tried to bully me. They really were like, you have to do this. And I was like, I don't think I do. And they were like, well, we'll see what's happening with your teeth. I mean, they might be kind of jacked up. They go in, they look at my teeth, they're like, all right, it looks perfect. Like, it's fine. And I was like, yeah, I know my body, you know? And so I'm so out of the Western model now in terms of like how I operate with my health. I do think that there are some aspects of the Western model that I do still interweave because they are valuable. But stepping back into that space and feeling like the domination energy immediately as soon as I walk in, and they're like, you must get x-rays. And I'm like, do I? Do I have to, you know? And so, yeah, there's a lot that we could go into. I'm sure it will interweave into the conversation. But yeah, I would love to hear, I think your path is really interesting when you shared with me about all of the different elders that you've learned from and all of the different traditions that you walk with, particularly like the intercultural interweaving of so many different territories, races, lineages, medicine modalities, like all of it is so special, and it's also very rare. I feel like oftentimes people will stick with like one lineage and do that, or they put another lineage like on a pedestal and they think, well, these people know better, and this person because she's this race or she's this socioeconomic class or blah 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 blah, like it's less than. And so I would love for you to share a little bit more just about like all of the different, yeah, walks of life that you've been able to interweave in your path.
Yeah. Um, I think that, you know, I didn't have great, I didn't have a lot of traditional healers around me. That's not true. We had the like grandmas in my community that still knew how to, cook traditional foods and remembered remedies. They wouldn't call themselves healers, but they were healers. Um, but in outside of that, I would say most of the community that I was in, especially like the Black community, was relying on the Western medical system, and they were really sick. So from a young age, I was able to see that and like did not have a lot of faith in Western medicine and was like, okay, well, like what are the medicines that will support us with um, diabetes, heart disease, reproductive health issues, things like that. And so like I was saying before, I just started seeking truth. And I would say the first lineage I came upon when I was trying to get sober, yeah, like I said, around 1920, was Ayurveda and Hinduism. That was like the the gateway for me to start learning about natural medicine and ancient medicine. And I was really devoted and, was reading Vedic text and learning about constitution and learning about Ayurvedic medicine and herbs and applications and pairing that with my like asana practice and my way of life. I was just fully living that. Um, and that was beautiful. And then I'm trying to think of what the next catalyst was. So then I would say the next like symptom or health issue that came up for me was around my womb. And I didn't have periods for a while. And then that led me to Chinese medicine and somatic therapy. I started studying Chinese medicine and started working with an acupuncturist and then like started working with Chinese medicine herbs and was learning about the meridians and how energy flows in the body. And then after that, I started to have more capacity to go into like the consciousness of why these different symptoms were happening for me or why I was in certain patterns. Because before that, I don't know that I had the capacity to go there. And then that led me to shamanism. And I was actually introduced to shamanism through a white woman and through many white women. I was living in Boulder, Colorado at the time, which is like saturated in healing arts. And I've always, I will say about my path, like people and medicine has always been so generous with me. Like I always feel so grateful and could just continue to give thanks for people's generosity because it was like I'm like, okay, there's something going on with my womb. I need to process like sexual trauma from my childhood. I need to process like dynamics in my home. I needed to process so much. And so yeah, probably around age 25, 26, I started to dive into shamanic work, which I loved. And like I said, originally it was like white witches that led me to that work. So grateful for them. And then from there, I became even more curious about like the unconscious and plant consciousness because I after I experienced my first shamanic journey, which plants were involved, and experienced Olympia for the first time, I had only worked with plants in a more like clinical setting, even like Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, it still had like a Western application to it. I didn't hear about plants having like consciousness as much from the people I was learning those medicines from. Plant consciousness really came for me through shamanism. And then from there, I'm like, okay, well, who else? Who else sees plants as having consciousness? Who else works with plants in this way? And then that's when I was led to Mexican curanderas who taught me about curanderismo and taught me about limpias and just like all of their healing rites, the healing rites of like Mesoamerica. And from there, that led me to the jungle. And that eventually, that's when I started to work with ayahuasca and chacruna in the jungle, um, which expanded my understanding of like consciousness, of time travel, of plant consciousness, energy medicine, sound medicine, like journey work, like that just took it like way deeper and really like integrated all that I had been doing at that point since I was like 19, trying to heal myself. And also journeying in the darkness and walking like between worlds. So that's been my journey, and I'm sure I apologize for like other teachers and lineages that I've worked with that I'm probably forgetting. Like honestly, there's so many I couldn't speak to all of them. Um, and I would say, or I know that like my ancestors led me to every single lineage, every single medicine, every single teacher. Like I never felt like personally a conflict of interest as a Black woman. I've always like stayed connected to my Black roots, my family, my ancestry, the medicines that I have access to with the medicines that I have access to through them. And I have no doubt that my ancestors were like, okay, these are the other medicines that you want in your toolbox. These are the other medicines that you want to learn. And my body was like so receptive to all of them, remembered all of them. And I think that when we talk about like grandmas and all of the grandmothers that I feel help me, I do feel like they're from all different lineages. I don't feel like they're just from one culture. So, yes.
Yeah, wow. So special to hear your path and how things have interwoven. I mean, I have somewhat similar lineages that I carry, right? Like I'm currently getting a lot deeper into like traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, Vedic astrology, German New Medicine came into my field like last maybe a year and a half ago, and it has like completely transformed my health paradigm. I'm currently getting deeper into like my homeopathy studies. And then I, of course, have my like very deep path in the Colombian jungle, particularly with the lineage of the Kofan people, the medicine of ayahuasca, and just the medicine of the territory as well of Ucumaricanque and the Kofan nation in Colombia in particular. And for a long time, I I really like policed excuse me, I really policed myself. I really like interrogated myself as, a daughter of Europe, as a woman who people would see as white, of really just being like, who am I to go outside of my lineage in this way? And the funny part of all of it is that, like, actually, what brought me online, like the thing that brought me back to my true medicine, was spending a lot of time in Europe in my like late teens, early 20s. I spent a lot of time in my ancestral homelands in England, in Ireland, in Wales. I never got to go to Scotland. I spent some time in Germany and then in France and in other parts of Europe. And there was a lot of, I would say, like cellular remembrance that was coming through. I wasn't conscious of it at that moment in time of like, wow, my ancestors are like bringing my medicines back to me. But when I look back on it now, I'm like, oh, that was the point of all of that. Like in my early formative years, when I was coming into early adulthood, I chose to go back to my homelands, mostly just to travel, just to like vibe and have fun. But on a deeper, soul level, there was this calling that was just like, go back to your original waters, go back to the mountains of your peoples. Go back and see the meadows that your ancestors collected all of their medicines from. Go to the holy wells and pray. You don't need to know what you're doing. You don't need to have any clue about what this pilgrimage means, but like it will unfold in time. And then, it is interesting because I know a lot of people actually in the United States who kind of start their medicine path with, particularly like with ayahuasca, in this way that I kind of refer to as like the white woman doorway. Like they find a nice white lady, who often looks like me and is maybe 20 or 30 years older than me, who has done a lot of walking in between the worlds and who has, brought forth her own European lineage work, but then also has gone outside of her lineage to learn with people from a lot of different intact cultures. And I'm thinking particularly about this man who is Peruvian, Peruvian American, who started his path with ayahuasca with this white woman in upstate New York. And after working with her a little bit, he was able to open the door and go back to Peru, where he's from, and to like actually go to the jungle, go to the territories, be with the indigenous elders, and sit in that way. And he said he was like, I needed this like white lady with blonde hair and blue eyes who I felt really safe with to open that door for me. And no, was she the person who I went like super deep into those studies with? No, but she was the bridge between that I needed. And I've heard a lot of people speak to that of like the importance of bridge people and the ones who do walk between worlds in terms of the people who are similar to us in their paths, where they've gone from like the Western kind of 3D matrix world that we all live in, and then going into these really beautiful, intact cultures that have their own stuff to them too. They're not perfect, they're not ideal, but they do have still a lot of their traditions still alive and still prospering in their own ways. And then figuring out how to bring that medicine forth and how to interweave. And yeah, I totally feel similarly when it comes to, my own relationship with my late teachers, Abuelo Kerouin and Abuela Maria, who I speak about a lot, probably on like every episode of the podcast. The abuelo was 110 when he died. And this was a man who welcomed any person into his home if they wanted to learn, if they wanted to heal, if they wanted to do their work on this earth of like awakening human consciousness and coming back into right relationship with the laws of nature. And I remember being with this man, and there were, of course, always a lot of indigenous people around, but there were people who looked like me. There were people of European descent. There were mestizo people. There were Black people. There were Asian people, people of every single race, socioeconomic class, gender, sexuality, whatever, religion, like they were welcome in his home if they were here to learn. And so I feel similarly in that, like, when I speak about ancestry, both in my own lived experience, but then, like, as a collective, I really do feel what you say of like, we have so many elders from every tradition that are here working with the ones who are like, I'm on this earth to do my work. I am down to interweave whatever modality is going to be of service to the enormity of this path of essentially realigning humanity with love, with true unity, with like a clear vision and intention to heal things 7 generations forward and 7 generations back to like plant those seeds, right? And so hearing your story of like all of those different beautiful teachers and elders and wisdom traditions that you walk with is inspiring, and it's exciting for a person like me who walks similarly, and hopefully to listeners who are maybe feeling like, well, I don't know, like, do I have the right? Like, it's not my bloodline. Like, am I allowed to be in this space? You know, all of those internal questions of like policing and doubt and shame, like, it doesn't serve. It doesn't serve. It's a good phase to go through. It's good to like, really question your motivations behind things. And then at a certain point when you decide like this is in alignment, just got to go for it, which is what you've done. Yeah. Yeah, I would love to hear a little bit more about your path, specifically within the ceremonial space and the role of guardianship that you stepped into, understanding what facilitation entails, starting first in that ceremonial work that you did in the jungle, and then, we'll move forward into how that's transitioned into your path with birth work, but I want to start there.
So I want to start by saying that I grew up in a Baptist church, in a Black Baptist church in Virginia. And that's really where I first learned about guardianship and container and discipline in a space. Um, it was a great model and a great framework for me. And to understand ceremony and reverence, and also like how to recognize God in a space and like what needs to happen for God, for spirit to move within somebody, for somebody to feel safe enough to liberate themselves from pain, from sorrow, from suffering, whatever it is. So I really learned that first in the Black church. And then when I like finally made my way to ceremony with ayahuasca, it was held in a really beautiful way, like my first ceremony. And I was in awe of the container. I love, I loved how pristine it was. And I loved like what was able to happen in that container of safety and love and non-judgment and rules and discipline. It's like we had a dieta leading up to it. Like it was that was pretty strict. There was a lot of restrictions around what you didn't eat. I didn't know, of course, at that time what I was getting into, but I was like, here for it. And then going into ceremony and seeing what that created and seeing how that like elevated the sense of safety and protection in the space was I was just in awe of it. I was like, this is the most amazing thing I've ever experienced. And I wanted more. It also felt like all of these other modalities, all of these other healing spaces, or a lot of other healing spaces that I've been in, it felt like home. It felt like I had like returned to a place that I hadn't been to in a long time. There was that like remembrance there of like, "Oh, I remember this." So from there, again, lots of generosity, was like not too short after that, not too short of a time after that, I was invited to the jungle for the first time for a dieta, a plant dieta in Peru outside of Pucallpa. And again, like got to witness the what I will call like the container of the dieta, and then what that allowed to happen, the healing that happened for myself in my own body, and then the healing that I witnessed in other people from the rules around what foods to eat, from the practices, the spiritual practices that we were doing in addition to um, intaking specific foods, to the like abstinence from a lot of things, the like not partaking in a lot of things, the clarity in the field of the people who were physically guarding this space. And then, of course, feeling how the plants became a guardian for me, and how we had this like energetic but very profound and very clear contract for me saying, okay, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm asking for. I want to be in a relationship with you. Okay, the plant says yes to me and then now becomes my guardian. Like it was it was quite the mystery school for me. And I stayed doing that work, eventually became like a guardian in ceremony. And the more plants that I dieted, the more container I created for myself, the better guardian I was. I also saw that when I didn't have a container, wasn't like a bad guardian, but my guardianship was was skewed, or was a little sloppy or a little messy, right? Even like dieting certain plants, like what kind of like muddied or muddled the field. And even with my mentors and my teachers who were pouring medicine, and most of them were women, um, witnessing them and their lives and like what muddied the field for them, what muddied their guardianship. So I had a lot of learning, and a lot of that learning was through witnessing others and myself as we really did our best to be in relationship with these plants so that healing could happen, so that people could be in their aliveness, so that people could become more of themselves and align with health, align with vitality, so that they could live the life that they wanted. Like that was the goal of all of it. So learning from the plants, from mentors, from myself.
Yeah, so beautiful what you spoke to. First, in terms of like this work always begins within us. And in the Holy Well, which you and I are both a part of, I've spoken about the Holy Well a lot on the podcast because it's this amazing container of yeah, I would say like medicine woman training in many different modalities with our teachers Kiddist and Mora and other brilliant women. They speak so much to the yin and the yang and the yang framework that women are often really resistant to, scared of, and just like totally unaware of the necessity that is required to like cultivate that within ourselves to create like a strong masculine structure, one that gives us a solid spine, right? One that offers us internal resourcing and safety and clarity and like long-term vision and the capacity to follow things through and to have our own backs, you know? And I think that when you get into a ceremonial space with plant medicines, with ayahuasca, I can speak to the most in depth because of my relationship with the plant. You are like blown out into like every dimension you could think of, many of which are absolutely beautiful and many of which are absolutely terrible, and you never know where you're going to end up. And you're in such an expansive yin space of consciousness. You are able to time travel and dimension hop and shape shift through like every single universe that exists in the cosmos. And if you don't have a solid internal structure or like a compass that guides you to a North Star to say, like, actually, I can choose to not engage with this. Actually, I can drive the bus here. Actually, I can surrender and I can flow in this moment, but not get lost in the craziness of everything that's going on, the sacred craziness of this ceremonial space. I found that a lot actually through my music, through my songs that I was receiving from the plants, that I was receiving from the territory, that I was receiving from my elders, from the fire, from the waters. And I remember having one really wonderful elder say to me about my song, she was like, Clarita, you have a beautiful voice. You channel these medicines so beautifully. And also, where are you directing your medicine? Like, who are you calling on? Because I'm hearing ancestors from so many different places, and I'm hearing all of these stories, and I'm hearing so much coming forth, but like, I want to hear you. I want to hear your soul. I want to hear your medicine. And so, what is that? Who is that? And to find that, you have to find your yang. You have to find your framework, your spine, your internal safety. And you can't move into a place then of sharing that both through your music, but also through your guardianship, through your capacity to hold space and maintain safety for other people if you haven't cultivated that in yourself. And I went through my own very messy process of not having that internally and shifting into many different roles of responsibility within the ceremonial space, within the indigenous village that I was living in, having so much on my shoulders and actually not having the internal resourcing to maintain my strength with it. Which I'm grateful for that experience. It taught me so much. And I'm grateful that I found teachers who could speak to the necessity of that cultivation in a language that made sense to me. Because when you're working within an indigenous context, it's just interwoven into the fabric of their culture. They don't have to say it to another person because children are just witnessing all of the generations above them doing it, right? Whereas as an outsider who doesn't have that example in your own life and you come into those traditions, but then you get put in a role of responsibility, but you don't know how to walk with it, it's hard. It's really hard. And then also to not put Indigenous people on a pedestal, I also saw many elders who did messy stuff in their own personal lives and at times in ceremony, although in ceremony they usually kept it very tight. But I did see how that impacted their medicine. I saw how the ways in which they kind of fell off the path outside of ceremony then showed up in the cup of medicine that they offered to me. I could taste it. I could hear it in their songs. I could feel it in the way that they walked through the space. And I don't say that with judgment because they're human beings. I say that with reverence to the imperfection that they themselves are grappling with. And as a way to recognize that, like, that really is the path, is like feeling yourself fall off a little bit and then figuring out, okay, what is it that I have to do to get back into alignment? What degree of self-respect and discipline and devotion to my work do I need to call forth in order for my gifts to really be able to be of service, in order to really move from a place of offering, not from a place of ego, not from a place of illness, not from a place of extortion or extraction, but really from a place of like overflowing my cup because I am really I'm resourced and I'm stable and I'm strong. And it just reminds me of like what when I spoke with one of my elders with Abuelo Keruin about this one time, because I was asking in particular, how is it possible that we have shamans, male shamans in particular, who engage in, sexual abuse in and out of ceremonies, mostly with female patients, but also with male patients at times. How is it that we have shamans who are really grappling with addiction, but then they're still saying that they're like a curandero who can heal other people? How is it that we have shamans who are, operating from a place of a lot of spiritual manipulation when it comes to money and financial manipulations? Like, how is that possible? These are supposed to be guardians of the light. These are supposed to be keepers of the truth. And then they do messy stuff like this. And his response was so beautiful because what he said to me was every human being has their soul imprint whose only goal is to walk with God. And then we also have our human imprint that is very scared to be aligned with God consciousness because it means that all of the ego has to crumble. And so often on any path, the closer that you get to God, the more intense your human part of yourself is going to test that because it's scared. And it just pulls you off and it pulls you off and it pulls you off. And his, firm stance was a person does not get to call themselves a curandero until they get back on the path. If they fall off in that moment, you are not a healer. You're not acting in a way that is healing. If you can get back on the path and you can stay on it straight, yes, your community will continue to recognize you as that. But if you fall off, no, you have to get right. You have to get right with God. You have to get right with yourself. And then maybe at some point you'll be able to show back up and really be of service again. Yeah, there was a lot there. I'd love to have you share a little bit about how your work with the plants and ceremony ended up bringing you into birth work. Because when I asked you, how did you come into women's work and women's medicine? Your response was, through the plants. And I was like, oh, that was the same thing for me. Like, what did that look like for you? So I'd love to hear you share about that.
Mm, well, it's actually so relevant to what you were just speaking to, which was it's like there was something in me that knew I needed to pause and that I was no longer being of service, which was really like earth-shattering, honestly, because I thought I could just like keep going. Um, and I didn't even fully understand why I needed to pause, but like I knew I wasn't being of service anymore on my path in the specific way I was doing it. I wasn't necessarily like causing a lot of harm, right? Or harm. Um, it's just my medicine was like no longer flowing through this role that I had been letting it flow through. And that was happening simultaneously as I was learning more about women's health, learning more about the womb, and also feeling like I needed another guardian. I needed another ally. I had been dieting a lot of plants and was feeling them around me and feeling them in my container, feeling them in my spine, as you speak to, which I love. But I needed something else. I was also seeing in the ceremony space women giving their power to the medicine. And like what that looked like was there was a lot of like, the medicine asked me to do this, or coming and fully like surrendering to the medicine. And it felt like women were coming into ceremony um, more and more disempowered, but they were just like blind to a power in them, Like it wasn't like, oh, you're disempowered and because you are just like shit out of luck or something. It was like, no, you have power. Like, where is it? Where is it? And I didn't know where it was. I was just like so confused. We're working with consciousness, we're working with stories, we're like looking at trauma, looking at abuse. We're like trying to reclaim affirmation, song, chakra, like, all of the things. And I'm like, why are women like repeatedly coming into these spaces disempowered? And not all women, right? It's like there were some women that had it. And I couldn't differentiate why some women had it and some women didn't. And I needed to learn why. And so that led me to birth work and learning about the womb. And again, it was like my ancestors just like led me there. That felt like the biggest truth. And it started with me wanting to learn more about womb and pelvic care outside of the medical system, because I myself was not finding a lot of success with like chronic womb pelvic issues. And then I was witnessing other women not finding success in that. And again, I'm like saying like, okay, I'm taking a break from working with medicine. This is my focus now. And the more I learned, the more I understood like, oh, like this is what we're missing. Like this is the disempowerment, because somewhere along the way, many of us have forgotten the like potency, the power of the womb space, and all of the messages, the medicine, the healing that she has to offer us. And yeah, that's what led me there.
Yeah, beautiful. And you know what I was thinking about before I got on this call, because I'm in a similar space, I've been out of the jungle full time for about 9 months after living there full time for a year and a half. And I went back like in February and I sat in ceremony. And then I had another experience here in the States, actually, very surprisingly, where I got to sit in ceremony just a few weeks after that. That was in March. That was the last time I sat. And there's been other opportunities to drink that have come up in my field. And every time I've been like, yes, let's do it. And then like something blocks it. Like there's just like something that doesn't allow it to happen. And at first I was really heartbroken about it because I love being in ceremony. Like it does feel like home, like how you spoke to kind of earlier of like the first time I ever sat in ceremony, I was like, oh, this is what I'm meant to do. I'm a ceremonial being because I think all humans are ceremonial. I think that is actually our birthright, is to walk a ceremonial path of life in all that we do, not just in terms of like drinking a bunch of ayahuasca or being in altered states of consciousness all the time with psychedelic or entheogenic medicines. Um, but it's been a really hard adjustment in terms of my identity. I'm like, no, like I'm the, jungle girl. I'm the Yahesera. I'm the one who's like singing with the elders. Like that's my path. And then, you know, that's not what my path looks like right now, actually. And what I was thinking before I came on this call with you was that, that plant, the medicine of Yahe, the Colombian brew of ayahuasca, really did teach me how to save my own life in the deepest sense. Like I was in such a dark underworld. I very likely would have died just based on what my life looked like at the time that I found the plant. And also, the plant brought me into the medicine of womanhood. That's really what brought me back to life, right? Was the plant helped me heal the deepest seated trauma in my womb, which was not only sexual abuse that I experienced in childhood, in my own teenage years, in my young adulthood, but also 7 generations of my family of unspoken childhood sexual abuse, like all of that. And then really looking at all of the I would say like spiritual attacks on the womb consciousness collectively. That was like the most life-changing ceremony that I ever had. I took a cup of medicine because I was dealing with horrible chronic vaginal and pelvic infections for 9 years, and I could not clear it. I couldn't clear it. I had gone to every single healer, every modality you could think of. It was horrendous. I had so much pain and suffering. And I prayed with this cup. I was like, show me
what the fuck is going on with my womb, with the wombs of my family, and with the wombs of the world? And let me tell you, that was a very tall order because my shit got rocked. And for months and months and months, I was just seeing these assaults on this collective womb consciousness and women in general, right? And also on men, because men are interwoven into this. Every man comes from a womb. And so, really recognizing like the deepest healing needs to be in the medicine of womanhood for me. And so as I've, taken a break from the jungle and have had to step back from my deep ceremonial work in that realm of medicine, recognizing that exactly what you're speaking to, like my deepest healing has come from realigning with womanhood and the rites of passages that I was not initiated into, that so many women in my family of my recent lineage have not been initiated into, and it's not their faults. And also, it is my responsibility to bring those rites of passages, to bring those initiations back into my bloodline, into my communities, and to take on that responsibility of feminine guardianship of those wisdom waves, right? And it's really that exact thing that has brought me into my own path with birth work and just women's reproductive health and overall health in general. That has been the big thing. And I, when you were speaking to these women coming into ceremony over and over again and coming disempowered and like getting more and more disempowered because it really is like an outsourcing of your authority. It's an outsourcing of your autonomy and it's an outsourcing of responsibility over your own life. And it's a lot of like the plant knows better or the elder knows better or, the medicine, whatever the medicine is, like believing that the medicine is outside of you instead of recognizing that the plant only shows you what you carry within yourself. The plant only is able to reflect the depth of wisdom through which you're able to recognize in yourself. And two, something you spoke to when I asked you about this was like all of these women who wanted a partner, all these women who wanted to come into a motherhood journey, all these women who had horrendous periods and painful cramps. They were coming to ceremony to like try to escape the responsibility of getting back into the body, like really being in deep communion and relationship with their womb, with their vagina, with their breasts, with their whole hormonal matrix, and to say, like, actually, it's not up here, out there in some other universe. It's right here on earth in my flesh that all of my power exists. And the work comes from learning how to fall back in love with the medicine of womanhood that I carry inside of me, right?
Yeah, that was so beautiful. Yeah. And I think like, as you were talking and I was just reflecting back on ceremonies, and I think, a lot of women were coming there for that. They were coming there for the reclamation of their womb space and um, coming there to reclaim their power. And integration is so important, and integration can be, I mean, one of the most challenging parts of an initiation of working with medicine is like, okay, what do you do after? Like, how are you continuing to like relate to your menstrual cycle, relate to your obvious, just relate to your womb, relate to your pussy, relate to your pelvis. What is your relationship with pleasure, with um, sex, with just sensation? Like, do you move as you're moving throughout your day, as you're walking? Like, do you feel your pelvis? Do you feel your pelvic floor? Do you know where your cervix is? Do you know where your uterine tubes are? Like, do you know your anatomy? And I think that it can be hard to do this like deep journey work that I do think that people were having, consuming ayahuasca, being in ceremony, receiving the songs and the medicines of the plants. But then, similar to what your teacher said about your song, then like, okay, now how am I directing that that medicine that I received, how am I directing that energy? Like, is it making its way all the way down to my feet, like through my womb? Or is it just like, staying in my head? So I feel a lot of like compassion for um, what the medicine, and a lot of like reverence and gratitude for what the medicine space was doing and is doing, and the integration of really like knowing and continuing that journey work within your womb, within your body yourself, is like such an important piece of like grounding and integrating that medicine, and like for example, like having something to show for it, right? Like, how am I continuing to relate to my mother, even though I had this huge awakening about our relationship in ceremony, or I saw this vision of my birth in ceremony? And it's like, okay, well, like, how are you continuing to relate to her? How are you continuing to relate to your own womb? What is your relationship to being a mother yourself? So there's there's a lot there. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The integration piece is it's a huge topic, and I'm actually going to do a full episode with our dear friend Ariel, who's been on the podcast before, just all about integration, not just with any kind of plant medicines or psychedelics, but like the medicine of integration from any experience in general, because it is so necessary. But I would like to speak, you brought up something beautiful when we were talking about co-creating this episode together, talking about what feminine guardianship really looks like in any kind of ceremonial space, whether that is the ceremony of ayahuasca or plant medicines, but also the ceremony of birth, the ceremony of postpartum, the ceremony of initiating a woman into her menstruation, all of the women's medicine and the women's work as well. And the balance between having like genuine hands-on skills and like clinical training and the ability to back up what you're saying with, I put this in quotes, like scientific facts that are legitimate and true, like things that we do want to have like an evidence-based approach and practice, but then also to be able to walk with the, yeah, like the birth shaman role, right? Like the role of the community midwife, which is the person who midwives people from womb to tomb through all of life's passages and initiations in a reverent way, in a way that is truly interwoven with ritual and with devotion and with true spiritual recognition and the capacity to interweave all of the generations that are being birthed through this woman's womb as she's moving through these different phases of her life. So I would love to hear, what is your perspective around that, of just kind of like how you interweave the two worlds? And then also too, I guess another part of that is like, who gets to claim that role? At what point in time do you get to say, I'm a guardian, or I'm a steward, I'm a facilitator, I am a caregiver, I am, someone who is able to really hold space for the intensity of this moment, and just kind of like the lack of initiation that we also see in that field very often. Big question, lots of things to touch on, but I am curious.
I'm going to answer your second question first. Um, it honestly makes me sad to think about and to like feel into all of the initiations that we've lost. That would make it more clear for us to know who can be a guardian, or who is the right person for a specific like healing right. It's sad and it's unfortunate, and I do think that um we are finding our way with that. We're finding our way to recognize and like assign the right healers for different healings that we need in our lives, and at different seasons of our lives. I actually think it's very nuanced and very complex, like who can guardian, who cannot guardian. I think it depends a lot on like what's being guardianing, guarded, what's being what's wanting to be served. Um, I believe like ideally that thing picks the most appropriate guardian. Um, and if that person has the capacity or the training or whatever is like not really my business. Um, I would say specifically for like womb work or ceremony work, what has been the case for me is um, just years and years and years of like body literacy, of like learning my own body, learning other bodies, working with people. Years and years and years. Like it's like over a decade now of like journey work. Um, and being in integrity, I am going to be the right guardian for certain women and not the right guardian for other women based off of like what the life that I've lived and the journey that I've walked. And I think something that I've stayed true to is like whenever, like what's happening with medicine, whenever I feel like people are coming my way that I like can't serve or I don't have the tools for, it's time for me to pause. It's time for me to do another training, receive another, what I would call initiation, maybe adopt another teacher, turn towards, return to a lineage, return to a teacher, things like that. So that's how I work. Um, but it's really muddy. And unfortunately, there are many people who are providing services, offering healings that maybe are in over their head, but then that's a journey too. And that's an initiation of itself when you get the kickback of that, of like, oh, wow, I was in over my head. And that was actually like way too much for me to hold. And, um, oh, I actually caused harm. I actually like did damage. I actually messed up. And like, what now? Ideally, they like pause and, return to their teachers. Um, but then that person is kind of like left, the person that they were serving is like left open and vulnerable. Um, it's a very, yeah, we're living in a really like complicated time. We're also living in a complicated time because I think about with, oh my gosh, I could go down so many rabbit holes, but let's just like stay on ceremony specifically. There are people like going to college, going to university to serve psychedelic medicines, to serve entheogens, right? Who have like, maybe they've journeyed. Some of them have journeyed, some of them have not ever. Um, and it's their first experience journeying. And they're being honored or revered over people who are growing up like working with medicine, working in the jungle, who have journeyed for decades and decades, and maybe their ancestors, their more recent ancestors, for centuries and centuries. And I think that that is a shame and problematic. I think that one of the benefits of I do see though, I guess, a benefit in when there's Westerners coming to work with medicine, having bridge builders there to support them to integrate because um, while I think that the integration is just different. Um, being somebody who like lives in the West, who lives in America, who works a 9 to 5, who needs to pay rent and pay bills and is interacting with a lot of different people after they come from the jungle or come from a diet. Like I think that there needs to be an integration, but um, I guess like long story long, like I really don't know. I really don't know. And um, yeah, it's so nuanced, like what each person needs on their journey and who gets to decide that. It's like so much bigger than me, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with everything, and I don't know either. I have no clear understanding. Yeah, I mean, maybe then going back to the first question, that part of it of like specifically within women's spaces and the interweaving of, clinical training, spiritual training, what has that looked like on your path, and what would you love to see more women like welcoming into their own work as well?
On my path, it's definitely been both, like receiving clinical Western training, like understanding anatomy, like science, understanding yeast and how yeast works and how the urinary tract works, understanding the our physiology as women has been so, so, so important. I would not be where I am as a practitioner without understanding the physiology. Like I couldn't just depend on the journey work. Like I tried to do that. I tried to like see into and understand the womb, and it didn't really integrate for me until I learned more about the physiology, which has been more so in the past like 5 years. And then also learning about how the plants like interact with the physiology. And then I can hold that. I can hold all of that while I'm holding the energetics and the spirituality and the messages from beyond the veil, the messages from the mystery, the messages that are not are not are connected to the science, but are more connected to like are from the psyche, are from lineage, are from ancestry, are from past lives, all of that. So for me, I have loved bridging the two. And it actually offers like more like clear and more, one of my friends said it recently, precise. It offers more like precise and more precision in like what would you call it? In the healing. The healing is more precise with the physiology and the science combined with the mystery, the magic. So that's how I love to work. Um, I journey with the framework and the understanding of the physiology of the womb and like how the womb works and how the body works.
Yeah, beautiful. And it was just making me think about like one of my past guests, Aya Maria Maldonado, who I know that you've also learned under. She speaks to something really beautifully very often about ancestral technologies of diagnostics that you will see within intact cultures. And so we have this like strange idea in the West of like, oh, they don't have any form of like diagnostics, like they just are able to, see into the ethers and whatever, which isn't true. Like they still have, they haven't been domesticated in the way that we have in the West. They still have this connection to their own innate like mammalian senses, that like their hands are the ultrasound, right? Or the different ways in which they're able to diagnose illness in the body through observation, through what we would call like evidence-based practices of like observing someone's urine, observing someone's bodily fluids, looking at their tongue, feeling their pulse, in the same way that you see a Western doctor do in like a lab setting, they're just doing it in the jungle or in the high Andes or in the desert or in the tundra or wherever their territory is. They still have that way of interweaving what we call anatomy and physiology and the endocrine system and the hormonal matrix and all of that kind of stuff. It's it's deeply interwoven into the fabric of their culture. We just can't recognize it with our Western eyes immediately. If you spend time in those cultures, you are able to see it more and more and be like, oh, that's what they're doing. Like I remember one of my teachers like looking at my hand at one point in time and being able to tell that I was like getting close to being anemic because the amount of coca that I was working with, and was like, you have to stop with working with coca, like it's not good for you. Or, having elders in ceremony being able to literally like see my kidneys, like to have full x-ray vision with their hands on my back and to see that my kidneys were really struggling and to offer me medicines. But they're able to work in that same diagnostic way. And so I think that it's important for bridge people like you, bridge people like me who dance in between the Western world and a more indigenous framework to recognize that all tools of diagnosis are valuable, whether or not it's like with a stethoscope or like a fetoscope, or if it's like just with your hands or like with a rebozo or like however you're going to be working with the reality of the body, not just like the cosmo-vision of the body, but the real flesh and blood. What is it telling me? Is an invaluable tool that there's a lot of different frameworks and modalities we can work with. Neither is better or worse, but it does have to be integrated. It can't be all like in the stars. Like it has to be also here on Earth. Oh my gosh. Okay. We have so much that we could keep talking about, but it is good to wrap up and to move on into our extended episode, which I'm so excited about. We're going to be talking about a topic that I love, all about like spiritual paranoia and psychedelic, hallucinations and, what I would refer to as like, how to say, yeah, just kind of losing your mind and figuring out how to reorient. So I'm excited for that episode, but I'd love to give you a little bit of space to just share how people can connect with you, if people are looking for your services, how they can book with you, all of that good stuff.
Thank you. People can find me. I have a website and I work virtually and I work in person. I live in northern New Mexico and I offer both virtual or in person, like holistic womb care, and also offer doula support. And obviously, all of that is like rooted in everything that we've been talking about today, both like the physiology and the spirituality, the mystery, the journey work. So people can find me through my website, which is just my first name and my middle name.com. And shoot me an email. Don't be afraid to reach out and ask questions. I would love to hear from people.
Awesome. We will include that info in the show notes for people who want to connect with you. Thank you so much, Briana. This has been a really, really beautiful conversation, and I'm excited to continue over on Substack with our extended episodes so people can subscribe to the podcast and get access to that. And yeah, just thank you so much.